Hello everyone, and welcome to this Spotlight webinar, Reaching Net Zero via Science-Based Targets. My name is Sarah Ridgen. I'm the Policy and Communications Officer at the Society for the Environment, and I'll be hosting today's webinar on behalf of the Environmental Policy Forum, or EPF in short. And we're a collective of professional bodies working in collaboration to influence policy and drive climate action. This webinar is the second in a three-part series, the EPF have organised post-COP26, looking at how we can ensure that the ambitions of COP26 can be realised by a tangible science-based action and policy change. So for today's webinar, we're putting the spotlight on three organisations who will share how they have taken action to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions via science-based targets. So the inspirational case studies will soon follow, with an opportunity to put your questions to the panel afterwards. But firstly, I wanted to provide a very brief introduction to the initiative to which all three of today's featured organisations have signed up to achieve their climate ambitions, which is the Pledge to Net Zero. So Pledge to Net Zero is an initiative which requires signatories to set science-based targets to tackle greenhouse gas emissions within their own organisations. It was the first of its kind in the UK, and we're starting to expand our signatories base into other countries. 135 organisations have made the pledge to date. So you can see the exact commitments pledge signatories have signed up to on this slide. So in the interest of time, I won't go into all the detail involved, but I wanted to stress some key aspects of the initiative. So central to Pledge to Net Zero is the knowledge that we need those with the expertise and proven competence to lead the way to achieving net zero. By showing how climate ambitions can be turned into tangible science-based action, signatories to the pledge can provide knowledge and inspirations to others. So we often hear of organisations that want to do the right thing and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, but aren't sure of how to go about it. And that's what the Pledge to Net Zero is all about, that sharing of good practice. So just to expand on that a little bit more, it's really important that organisations aren't just taking, any kind of climate action, but action that is driven by science and expertise. So that's why the setting of science-based targets is just such an important part of the Pledge to Net Zero. And signatories to the pledge can also gain access to the network of other organisations taking a professional, data-driven approach. So if you haven't yet made the pledge, please do consider signing up via pledgetonetzero.org, and more guidance, resources and case studies are available via this same website. So I think that's enough from me. So I'm now going to hand over to our first speakers for today. Ashley, so we have a case study from WARD, who are a recycling company, and their head of sustainability, Ashley Oates, RMP, and Joanne Upton, environmental manager, will be presenting this together. So over to you both.
Hi, so we're WARD, and we are an almost 100-year-old family cycling for almost a century now, and so we're in an ideal position to sort of look at the ways that we can improve, and so we were really keen to get involved really early on with Pledge to Net Zero. We're dotted all over the country, and we recycle metal waste, hazardous waste, and that includes things like textiles as well. And because we're spread all over the country, we do different modes of transport like rail and HGVs, and so we've got lots of different places where we can affect what we're doing with our carbon. I'm going to hand over to Jo Upton, who's our environmental manager and our specialist in energy and carbon, to talk about how we've reduced our carbon intensity.
Good morning. So I started at working at WARD about 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, and this was the first time that they had a dedicated member of staff whose part of their remit was to look at energy and carbon within the business. So they'd already started to do a bit of work, but it was one of my roles to bring it together and set the agenda moving forward. So we set our baseline as financial year 2029, and developed a strategy, 2019, and we set a strategy for our carbon reduction moving forward. So we use carbon intensity as one of our metrics. We look at turnover, full-time equivalent, and we also look, my preferred option is to look at our processing. So how many kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent do we use to process 1 ton of material? And that kind of normalizes all of our data. So as you can see, we've had some fantastic progress so far, and I just want to talk to you about how this has been achieved. So first and foremost, we looked at renewable energy. So we've been doing feasibility studies across the business. This has been held up a little bit by the pandemic, but we really want to get some on-site renewables installed, and we're just working out what the best option is for us. We continue to do energy audits. So there'd been some energy audits done before I arrived, and they're being repeated again next year. And so we have been shifting a lot from a lot of our motors. We've been installing energy efficient motors across the business, and we've realized some really significant changes there. For renewable energy, though, we're looking at a couple of options. So we've looked at purchase power agreements. So in the background, there's some work going on there. And then we're also looking at, we have made a commitment to, at the end of 2022, we're going to switch all of our renewables to 100% electricity. So that won't show additionality at this stage, but we're hoping over time that if we can get some renewables on site, that we can put some additional renewables onto the grid. We've been shifting a lot of our freight from road to rail. So, and this has significantly reduced our carbon emissions. Our sites are strategically located around the country, and some of our satellite sites are strategically located around the country next to rail sidings. And so just from April to September this year, we've managed to save 2,000 tonnes of carbon, and that would have actually been more, but with the pandemic, there's been a lot of issues with rail in the same way that there has with road. We're also looking at maybe doing some trial projects around biofuels, so trains that run on biofuels. So that's an interesting project moving forward. Movement of people. So there's been a real shift within the business that all of our company cars should be pure electric. So now that we're now sitting at about 80% that are pure electric, most are pure electric. Some example for some of our buyers that do a lot of miles are currently on hybrid, but they won't be long before they're all on electric. We've been rolling out our charging infrastructure across the UK. That's in place on our major sites, and we're hoping to roll it out to some of our satellite sites next year. So I just wanted to talk to you about some of the tools that we use when we very first set out on this journey. So we were fortunate the board came to us and said that they wanted to pursue a net zero agenda. But because we're sustainability professionals, we wanted to make sure that any pledges that we made were transparent and credible. And the SBTi target setting tool was really a cornerstone of that for me. So I planned a number of different scenarios so I could picture how this could be achieved for WARD. What would reducing our emissions by 48% by 2030 actually look like for the business? So then I took the scenarios to the board. We agreed what the direction of travel was. And then we made the commitment about 12 months ago now. We've started to look at our scope 3. Well, we've been looking at our scope 3 emissions, but we want to expand on that in the next couple of years. So we are going to be using, and I've started to use it a little bit, but I'm going to utilise it more moving forward, the greenhouse gas protocol tool, and that's been really useful as well. So that's our journey so far, really.
That's great. Thank you both. So we're now going to move on to our next talk. I'm really pleased to introduce Martin Baxter, FIEMA CM, Director of Policy and External Affairs and Deputy CEO at the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, IEMA. So over to you, Martin.
Right. Well, firstly, thank you, Sarah. Can you just confirm you can see my screen and you can hear me okay?
I can see your screen and your sound's fine.
Great, thank you. So, hello everybody. It's really good to be here and to be involved in this Pledge to Net Zero session, particularly because IEMA was one of the founding supporters of the initiative. So, and I think from our perspective, it was really important to provide an opportunity for the environmental services sector as a whole to be able to get behind translating ambition into action by driving towards a net zero future, but also important as well that IEMA, having been part of establishing the pledge, then actually lives up to that as well. So I'm going to just go through some of the IEMA climate change commitments, because I think many of you might have been engaged in various initiatives, and sometimes it can be quite bewildering about how these all link together. And so for us, it's also important that we work through things and we know what we have to achieve in each of these, and then bring that into a consolidated view in terms of setting our target and actually driving action. So our board, unsurprisingly, declared a climate and environmental emergency. Really important statement about the challenges that we face, but also the importance of organisations such as ourselves being a catalyst and enabler of solutions. We have very good links with UNFCCC, so we're one of the observers to the COPs, for example, and have worked with UNFCCC on a number of initiatives, and so we are a signatory or committed to their Climate Neutral Now initiative, which is all about not just taking action to reduce your emissions, but also making a contribution to netting those off. Of course, we're pledged to net zero, and I'll explain a little bit about this bit in a moment. By the nature of the targets that we set, we're also part then of Race to Zero. And finally, we signed up to the Professional Bodies Climate Action Charter, which is a collaborative movement around how professional bodies can help to drive climate action and raise ambition. So you can see that a number of initiatives that we're part of, some of which are overlapping some of the requirements, and some of them are a little different. Just in terms of how we've gone about it. So firstly, just a little bit about the scope of our footprint. And just bear in mind, IEMA is a relatively small organisation, so we would definitely fit within the criteria as being a small business. So we have fewer than or we have about 30 employees, etc., and we're a service-based organisation. So within our footprint, we included scopes 1 and 2 emissions, of course, but also scope 3, and within that scopes, we had business travel and employee travel to work. And I'll explain a little bit about how we're having to change this a little bit due to a changing context. We opted to set a science-based target to reduce our emissions from our scope 1, 2, and in 3 scope emissions. So we looked at that broader footprint using the science-based targets initiative approach. Within that, we used the absolute contraction methodology. So for us, that was really important that getting to net zero, we have to make sure that we can demonstrate we are going to reduce our absolute emissions, and that any netting off is a contribution to wider commitments and initiatives, but isn't really something that we're focusing on in terms of managing our carbon impacts. Our baseline year was 2019, and we set a target date of 2030, and we used the 1.5 degree So 1.5 degree compatibility in terms of the ambition of our targets. So we have a science-based target linked to the higher ambition within the Paris Agreement, and we set within our scopes 1, 2, and in scope 3 emissions. So that was the framework with how we started to pull both our target together and in terms of how we quantify our footprint. Now, the extract process on the slides, and we keep it up to date. So we as you would expect. So we report our direct emissions in terms of scope 1, so our gas and at the time our air conditioning or any air conditioning emissions. In terms of F-gases, and that's something that that was linked to our servers, etc. And so making sure that those were particularly for that cooling were properly controlled and maintained. In terms of indirect scope 2 emissions, so that was electricity consumption. And then we also had our business travel and staff commuting. You can see there that staff commuting and business travel are actually significant contributors to our GHG emissions in terms of our scope 3. And you can see where we need to get to in terms of our target. Now, our footprint does require quite a bit of narrative to explain it. I'll kind of outline why. So although we, when we had the office, we purchased green tariffs, we decided that we don't actually report anything other than grid average. So actually what we consume in terms of electricity, we report on that consumption based on the grid average. So although we're happy to buy green tariffs, we don't net them off on our accounts. Secondly, partway through 2020 or early into 2020, we moved to home working. So that's, and subsequently we don't have an office. So the nature of our business has changed quite considerably in terms of that footprint. So our scope 1 and scope 2 is effectively 0, and now it's all scope 3. And so what we're having to do is to look at how we account for home working emissions associated with our staff, as well as business travel, etc. So that's going to require a recalibration when we get to the end of this calendar year, which is both our financial year and our GHG reporting year. So we're looking at that, and clearly there are, some complexities about that. I'm sat here at home. There's no heating on, but I'm using power on my screen, etc. So there's, and I wouldn't have been doing that if I was in the office. So we need to account for this change in terms of our footprint. Business travel is going to be an interesting one for us going forward. So as an organisation, we're involved internationally in organisations like UNFCCC, the International Standards Organisations. So although it is possible to get to some places by rail by rail, particularly going into Europe, and that's fine. For example, the next UNFCCC COP27 is in Egypt, COP28 is in UAE. Occasionally, some of the ISO meetings can be in different parts of the world, and I chair a committee. So that would be that's going to be a really challenging issue for us to deal with going forward vis-a-vis our absolute emissions reductions compared to that 2019 target. So we've got to kind of be mindful of that, and certainly it does form part of our decision-making process about how we, what's the impact on our GHG footprint when we're doing things. We have, because we're part of the UNFCCC carbon neutral now, so we've purchased verified woodland carbon units, which are for emissions that have actually been sequestered. So they're not the promising kind, but that's from woodland that was planted some time ago. We bought the credits from those and retired them on the registry. But again, I mentioned we don't net them off in terms of our GHG accounts. It's part of a wider contribution to biodiversity enhancement, etc. And then we're looking to explore wider GHG quantification and emissions reduction through our scope 3 emissions, particularly around our IT So we did move the hosting platform for our website to an organisation that had lower GHG intensity than the provider that we had, and we worked with our IT suppliers to do that. And that's something that we will explore a bit further going on. So in summary, it's been an interesting approach, something we're obviously very committed to, and happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Martin. I thought it was a really interesting case study, so thank you for that. And now come to our final speaker for today. I'm delighted to welcome Rachel Purden, who is the Head of Sustainability at Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, and she's going to provide some insights into how Kew have taken action. So over to you, Rachel.
Perfect. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's really a really nice opportunity to be able to tell you about Kew, Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, and its recently launched sustainability strategy. So just because you can't necessarily see me, I just wanted to do a quick introduction to who I am. I've been working I have a background in natural sciences and plant sciences, but I've been working as an environmental sustainability professional since 2013. Originally, I was in the higher education sector, so I worked in universities around the UK, delivering sustainability strategies and carbon reduction plans within various universities. And then I moved to Kew just before COVID. So I was delighted and very lucky to get 2 weeks working on site in the gardens at Kew before lockdown happened. And then over the kind of year and a half where most of our staff were working from home, that's been the period in which we've developed, built buy-in, built momentum, and launched and are now starting to deliver our sustainability strategy. So obviously a slightly weird time to be writing a 10-year strategy. There's been a lot of change, and it's been an unusual process of getting to know the organisation. But those 2 weeks on site before lockdown were absolutely crucial. And I grew up in West Wales on the building site of a self-built eco home. So that's really where a lot of my passion has come from, is from that background in rural Wales building an eco house. So to give the context to Kew, so obviously a lot of people know Kew as a beautiful gardens in southwest London, but we're actually a lot more than your average garden. We actually employ more scientists than horticulturists. So we have 350 scientists working at Kew to protect biodiversity all around the world. We actually have 3 sites. Our main site is Kew Gardens in Richmond, but we also have a site at Wakehurst in West Sussex, which is actually slightly larger by acreage, and that includes a site of special scientific interest. And we have a site in Madagascar. We have a conservation centre in Madagascar, and about 40 of our staff are full-time based in Madagascar. We have around 300 buildings and structures, of which 30 are listed. And the fact that our estate is a reasonably old, well protected, well loved, well treasured, and culturally very important estate. But that does bring with it some challenges, and I'll come on to some of those. But the fact that there's a whole variety of building types, from some reasonably new offices to some newish lab buildings to some old lab buildings to grade 1 listed Victorian tropically heated single glazed farmhouse. So you can imagine that comes with a whole variety of sustainability challenges, but also opportunities. And the other point I kind of wanted to address right up front, because it's nearly everyone's first question, is, well, surely because you're a gardens and you have loads of trees, surely your footprint is surely you're already climate positive, surely your footprint is already offsetting itself. And the answer to that question is sort of that we're doing that work at the moment to develop that really detailed understanding of the carbon capture and carbon sequestration from the trees and landscapes on our sites. But to skip to the end, not to undermine the scientists and the detailed work that they are doing at the moment, but we know that the answer is that no, our sites do not, our land and our sites are not large enough and are not offsetting enough to neutralise our current footprint, our current baseline emissions that comes from all of the activities of of managing and running Kew as a site and doing our scientific and conservation work. So I'll come on to that in a little more detail, but that's just to set the scene for Kew and our sites. So 2021 has been a really exciting year for Kew as an organisation, because we've not just launched our sustainability strategy, we've actually launched 3 strategies that set out our organisational mission. So the key strategy, the kind of head of the fleet of strategies, is our Manifesto for Change, which was launched, I think, in March this year. And our Manifesto for Change sets out the ways in which Kew will align its mission to tackling the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change. So the manifesto sets out 5 priorities for the ways in which we will work. Includes our scientists working to develop and deliver science and nature-based solutions to tackling these twin crises. The priorities include inspiring people to protect the natural world, extending our reach, so reaching more audiences, reaching more diverse audiences, using our voice and our expertise to influence policy and practice, and that's not just in the UK, but around the world, and training the next generation of experts through, we have a School of Horticulture, and our Science Directorate also has various MSc courses and PhD courses. So, and we also have a huge schools and learning program. So we engage with learners of all ages, and we're also training and sharing this expertise. So the manifesto was launched first, then we launched our sustainability strategy, which sets our headline goal to get to climate positive by 2030, which obviously I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. And then we've also launched our science strategy, which again is focusing on the ways in which we will develop these science and nature-based solutions. So go to the climate positive target, which is our kind of headline sustainability strategy goal. This is a simplified overview of our pathway to climate positive. It's obviously highly simplified. I think it makes it look a little bit too easy, but it's helpful to understand the journey. So these 2 arrows that are in green are the actions that we undertook before we launched the strategy. So we measured our carbon footprint baseline across all emissions categories. So that was the same year that I think both other organisations have used, which was the financial year 2019. So we measured our Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions for the 2019 baseline. And then we used that emissions baseline and the science-based target methodology to establish a science-based carbon reduction target on this same timescale. So 1.5 degree limit and a 2030 timescale. And then so those are the kind of baseline setting steps. Then the delivery pathway involves the work that we're doing at the moment, which is developing a much more detailed carbon reduction pathway and carbon reduction roadmap. Delivering carbon savings through wide-ranging decarbonisation activity. Obviously, we're not really waiting for step 4 to start delivering. There's a load of things that we are delivering already, but that will continue and need to increase. And then the final step being to offset more than the unavoidable emissions, more than the residual emissions by this 2030 target date. So with apologies for showing a graph, this is the diagram that we've used in the strategy to explain our definition of climate positive, which is, reaching net zero by reducing emissions even more steeply than our science-based target, and then more than offsetting the residual and unavoidable emissions. So reducing emissions as fast as possible is obviously the key. The science-based target, and this is just a personal point, but I actually find the terminology science-based target, while the SBTi are doing really fantastic work in developing a credible consensus and a credible understanding of what net zero or what emissions reduction targets need to look like. To me, your target should not be your limit. So to me, as the science-based target is really your upper limit, and your target should sit well below that. So we are aligned with the science-based target methodology, but we've been trying to refer to that more as a carbon budget than our target, because our target is to reduce emissions more steeply than that cap or that budget, that upper limit. And then when we aren't yet offsetting, but when we do need to begin offsetting, that will be by investing in high quality nature-based carbon sinks, because that aligns with our organizational mission, which is about protecting and preserving biodiversity all around the world. So just to quickly show you the way we've divided up our scope 1, 2 and 3. So obviously scope 1 and 2 on the left, you can see our organizational baseline is roughly 4,000 tonnes for scope 1, 2,000 tonnes for scope 2. And then we've divided scope 3 in half, with the categories on the left of this arrow being those categories that we were able to measure with a reasonable level of confidence in the accuracy of that baseline emissions, and that came to 3,500 tonnes. And then on the right-hand side, the categories within scope 3 that we've put in this bracket of our wider footprint, and rather than our core footprint. On the right-hand side are the categories. We took a baseline, we gathered the data, and we used the best available methodology, but which was based on the greenhouse gas protocol. But we did not feel confident in the level of preciseness of that baseline, due to the fact that the methodologies are still changing and the data availability is not good. And so with the emissions on the right-hand side in the wider carbon footprint, we know that that baseline is very approximately 12,000 tonnes, but we didn't feel sufficiently confident in the accuracy of that figure to include that immediately within the kind of core baseline, because the methodologies will, for example, a change in the methodology could easily cause that number of tonnes to increase or decrease by quite a large margin, and that wouldn't necessarily be because we'd actually changed something. It would just be because the way we were measuring it had improved. So that's the rationale for how we've put things in the core footprint or the wider footprint. And then we have also taken a baseline for the visitor travel aspect, which is outside of our organizational footprint, but clearly an impact and clearly something we want to measure and influence. And so we are measuring that, we will track it, but it's outside our organizational boundary. Okay, and then just to talk about some of the wider aspects of our strategy. So we've actually laid out 3 pathways to sustainability, which sit across Kew's action, Kew's expertise, and Kew's voice. And so action obviously being how we will transition to net zero as rapidly as possible, how we'll reduce the climate and resource impacts of our activities and operations and change the way we do things. Expertise being shaping and evidencing sustainable practices through our horticulture teams, through our science teams, through our support for nature-based solutions, and through collaboration with others. And collaboration is an absolutely core part of our strategy. And then voice being using Kew's voice to inspire and empower our audiences to celebrate and protect nature and to take action to tackle climate change. So we want to change the way we do things, but we also want to work with others to share this expertise and to use our voice to call for wider change, rather than just focusing on the changes that we make without catalyzing that wider impact. Okay, and then just to quickly touch on the kind of 2 pledges. Obviously, there's been a huge wave of net zero pledges over the past few years. I mean, watching the increase in percentage of global, even governments that have set a net zero target has been incredibly positive. But I guess particularly in the business world, some of those net zero targets are considerably more rigorous than others in scope, in the speed of the emissions reduction, in how much they're dependent on offsets, on the type of offsets that they're planning to use. And so having consensus on what these targets should look like and how to bring them together to build momentum and build credibility has been really important. And so that's for us the real benefit of having these wider organizational standards to align with and to bring people together in this race to zero. And I guess I'd say about the race to zero, I find that a powerful call to action, but it's a really collaborative race. We absolutely can't deliver this transition alone, and there's no way we should be trying to deliver this transition alone. So that there aren't, I mean, clearly some people are racing faster than others, and that's positive, but I don't really view it as a race with winners. I think it's a collaboration where we're all racing to change together, and we know we need to change as fast as possible. But I mean, in a worrying sense, I guess there's only losers if we don't manage to collaborate on this race and make progress together fast enough. Okay, and then just to flag, so when we launched our strategy in May 2021, we actually used the race to zero as a kind of as a collaborative call to arms. So this is a video at the top. I didn't want to actually show you the video, but it's two minutes long, and it's available on our website if you did want to have a quick look afterwards. And we've used this messaging. So the race is on to protect the planet. We're joining this race to reach net zero. And will you join us? Will you take action alongside Kew and alongside all the other organisations that are pledging to make these changes as rapidly as possible? And then again, just to pull out on voice, this isn't just about us committing to make these urgent actions. It's also about talking about them. So when we launched our strategy, we had some coverage of that strategy, and one of the things we did was showcase some plant-based food and drink. So that's one of the things within the strategy that we've picked out, is encouraging and enabling our audiences, those that visit the gardens, those that engage with the gardens, to transition to a more plant-based diet. So we had ITV on site testing our plant-based menu, and luckily it went down well. So that was good news. Okay, so just to track back to the kind of commitments within the strategy, obviously the headline commitment being climate positive with a science-based limit for 1.5 degree of warming. We've committed to developing a detailed carbon reduction pathway, a carbon offsetting policy, site-wide strategies for energy, water and waste. We're actually midway right now on developing our site-wide energy strategy, which is a really exciting and essential piece of work. Working with our suppliers to understand and minimize the negative impacts of our supply chains. That's a really important piece. As I kind of showed earlier on our scope 1, 2, 3 diagram, the scope 3 is a reasonably significant proportion of our impact. And so we know that working with our suppliers is going to be an essential part of this process. Okay, and then just to pull up some other examples from within the strategy. So we actually made roughly 50 commitments within the strategy, which were these sort of tick boxes scattered throughout the document. And these are intended to be kind of tangible actions, tangible commitments of the direction that we will take. So reporting scope 1, 2, and core scope 3. So we've started doing that. We reported core scope 3 for the first time last year. Encouraging our suppliers to set science-based emission targets. We will install electric vehicle facilities for visitors and staff. We'll work to understand and measure carbon sequestration and other ecosystem services provided by our site. So that's a really exciting piece of science work to delve into the detail of the carbon benefits from our 2 sites in the UK. We'll develop and curate learning and development opportunities to support staff at all levels in understanding broad carbon and sustainability topics. So one of the ways that we've started doing that is that we're now delivering carbon literacy training for staff, and that's applicable to any member of staff that wants to sign up. It's been incredibly positive and very well received. So we're rolling out carbon literacy training essentially as fast as we can. We'll use our living collections and our landscapes to support research into climate resilience, mitigation, adaptation, and sustainable practices. Sorry, I should have said the teal is action, this maroon color is expertise, and then orange is voice. So that's how they fit within the 3 pathways. So our visitor interpretation and our member communications will tell powerful stories about sustainability, increase scientific and sustainability literacy, and inspire visitors to take action and become advocates for climate and biodiversity. And we'll use our digital reach and influence to discuss the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, and sustainable development, grow our audience's understanding and encourage them to take action to tackle these challenges. So those are some examples of the wider commitments that sit within the strategy. And then since launching the strategy, here's just some pictures of some of the things that we've been able to achieve in the past year-ish. So the image on the top left is the Kew Explorer. So this is, it's referred to as a land train. It's a vehicle that takes visitors around Kew Gardens on a guided tour with a with a narration of some of the most interesting facts about the gardens and our buildings as well. So the 2 Kew Explorer vehicles have been replaced this year with 100% electric vehicles, which is really positive, and that's a step towards our target of having a 100% electric fleet by 2027. We also, on the top right, this is an example of some interpretation in the gardens, so some signs that are within Kew Gardens, and these are specifically talking about, so the title of this display is Acting Together for Our Planet. There's some information about COP26, and there's some information about our sustainability strategy, what we're doing to change, and on the back of this display, there's, for the first time, what we're terming calls to action for our visitors, where we're saying, these are the ways in which Kew is committed to change. These are the actions that we're taking. Here are some actions that you can take. So please join us in taking action to protect the planet. Then on the bottom left is, that's an example from our science team of the mapping that they're doing. So that they're mapping above ground biomass for all of the trees at Kew and Wakehurst, which is a considerable task. And they're also doing some really exciting work to understand below ground carbon as well, because we know there's more carbon in soils than above ground carbon. So understanding the carbon sequestration of your soils is really important too. So that piece of work is going ahead as we speak. They're mapping every tree and they're taking soil samples and doing really interesting work to understand the implications of fungal diversity and horticultural practices and land management practices on above and below ground carbon. And then on the bottom right is one of our newest buildings, which is the first building on site that has an air source heat pump. So it's net zero ready in the sense that it has no fossil fuel reliance whatsoever. Solar panels on the roof will produce enough energy to heat and power the building through the year. And because it's timber framed and timber clad, the sequestration from the timber involved in building that building not quite, but very nearly offsets the remaining embodied carbon from construction. So we didn't get this building certified as a net zero building because of the timescales and the speed at which things developed. But we did do the calculations. So we did work out the sequestration, we've worked out the energy balance, and we've worked out the embodied carbon from construction. And it's actually pretty close to being a net zero building. It's not quite exactly balanced, but it's certainly the closest building we've ever had to being net zero. And that's a really, really positive experience for us in learning that it is possible. And we've got close to delivering a whole life net zero building, which is really exciting. Okay, I think I might be getting close to being over time. So I'm going to skip through and just very quickly touch on one aspect. Obviously, within the pledge to net zero, one of the areas is thought leadership. And so the reforestation work that we've been doing, I think is a really positive example of thought leadership, where Kew is convening expertise both from within Kew Science, but also around the world, to try and shape the delivery of this huge wave of tree planting pledges that we're seeing from left, right, and centre. I mean, we were at COP26 last week, the week before, and you couldn't talk to anyone without uncovering a new tree planting pledge. And the trouble with those tree planting pledges is that not all tree planting is actually positive. So there are so Kew has developed 10 golden rules for tree planting for reforestation to try and ensure that we're shaping these solutions in the best positive way and not accidentally having unintended consequences with well-meaning but poorly delivered tree planting pledges. And the first rule the first golden rule from the Reforestation Declaration is to protect existing forests first, because that's such an important aspect of our impact on the planet. But I would encourage you to look up the 10 golden rules for reforestation because they're really helpful. Okay, that's all from me. I will take down my slides and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Rachel, and to all our speakers as well for what I thought were 3 fantastic case studies. So thank you very much. So now we're going to move on to the Q&A. So if you haven't already, now is the time to ask a question or two to our speakers today via the Q&A functions within your toolbars. So we'll do our best to get through as many as we can before 11 o'clock. So I'm just going to ask a question firstly, submitted in advance. So, which is about basically how hard you found it to embed carbon saving behaviour into your business. So really about the challenges. I know you've kind of touched on it a little bit, perhaps some of the challenges you face, but if you could elaborate a little bit more on some of the challenges you face and how you've overcome them. So, shall I come to Ashley and Joanne first?
Yeah, so we work, I would suggest, in a bit more of a challenging industry, really, working in waste management. Whereas we've got a sustainability team that are kind of very dedicated to the cause, really. We have to do a lot of work with our teams and the guys on site to try and bring them on board, and we are getting there, and we will keep chipping away. But what I would like to impart is that it kind of still continues to be quite a challenge, and I think that's reflective of society in general, really, that as sustainability professionals we can all sit in silos and talk to each other, and Ashley and I are obviously on the same agenda as same with some of the other colleagues in our team. But out on site, I think I just have to kind of like keep on chipping away and not getting downhearted. And the guys that work out on the yard definitely do want to talk to me about this and engage, but it's not easy. And I think that we just need to keep chipping away and working at it, really. So we are going to run out some carbon literacy training, but I think we're still probably around 18 months away from that really being able to take place. So if I just want to let other businesses know out there that if you're a business that's listening to this and you're not working in a business where everybody automatically is engaged, because, for example, with IEMA, for example, I would expect people to work within IEMA to be on this agenda. So if you're working within a business where that's not the case, you're not alone. We're with you.
I think getting the top-down leadership on it has been really, really key. So educating the board, getting us doing presentations and talks to the board about how this affects the business and doing some looking to the future and planning definitely helps to get them to filter it down from the top.
Brilliant. Yeah, that makes total sense. I think, Martin, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's fairly easy to get the support, the commitment, the buy-in from staff and all of that. I think, and I alluded to this in my presentation, I think the big challenge will come where we have really difficult decisions to make. Do we go and try and, the work, we've been to the last few COPs, and, Sarah was chairing UNFCCC events and raising the profile and helping to drive climate action. But the only way to get to Sharm el-Sheikh, which is where the next COP is to fly. I chair a standards committee in ISO that's driving action on environment and climate change. We have 500,000 companies that are using the standard. Do I burst IEMA's target to fly to chair a meeting, or do we say we're not going to do it? So that's where we will have really difficult decisions to make in terms of hitting an absolute emissions reduction, because at the moment we don't have options to get to some places by means other than international travel. So I think that's where the challenge and the trade-offs are going to be made. So we'll see where we get to. But yeah, fun.
Absolutely. Rachel, do you want to come in there?
Absolutely. And I completely hear you in terms of even at Kew, not absolutely everyone is prioritizing taking climate and biodiversity action at the absolute forefront of everything they do. And so there's always more buy-in that you need. There's always more empowerment, more upskilling, more engagement, and I think that is a key challenge. Is everyone, or in my experience, the vast majority of people do have it back of mind. They do have a kind of background desire to make the right decision, to reduce their climate impacts, to not waste stuff. It's sort of there, but that doesn't mean it's easy to do it, and that doesn't mean that it's obvious how to do it. And so that kind of empowering and enabling our staff to do those things in the best way through their work is absolutely a core of this. So I view a large amount of our challenge as that enabling piece, to make it easier for people to make the right decision and make it more obvious how to do that. So and actually that leads on to my next point, which I think is data. I think the transparency of impact is really important, and data is our biggest challenge. So at the moment we have pretty bad data about, so we have site-wide data for energy use, for water use, for waste, but we don't have that broken down by building or by team or by a sort of tangible level impact that people can really understand. And so making the impacts of those choices and making those obvious and understandable, and something that staff can use to drive decisions and to drive choices, I think is a core challenge, and that's a sort of enabler that once those impacts are more transparent, that enables a huge number of people to take action across their work.
Absolutely. I think we've just got a question here from Amber, environmental planner at Stantec, and it sort of feeds into what we've already been discussing really, but I don't know if anyone wanted to elaborate a little bit more. She's asking about the importance of persuading clients of the benefits of committing to science-based targets, and perhaps there's a bit here where she says, what are the initial steps that need to be taken to work towards these targets from your experience? So does anyone have any comments about that, sort of the first initial step that you see as sort of really vital to driving that action? Is it that buy-in first off?
For me, I think it's data, as Rachel was just saying, gathering the data in your business and the wider data to be able to present that to people, to show them the importance and the benefits that it can have. Often people perceive making changes for climate benefit to be hugely expensive, and that's not always the case, and it can often have huge cost savings, but being able to go to people with that data really makes a difference to getting them on board.
Definitely. Anyone else want to come in there?
I mean, I'm happy to pick up on the other part of the question, which is how do you influence clients? I think there are two things there. So one is landing a client with a legacy, which or with a project which isn't kind of compatible with the future is not good for the client. And I think being able to articulate that is going to be really important, and also that there are potential significant benefits from future-proofing that project and the activity that you're involved in. The other one, which I came across, so one of the big global consultancy firms has decided that they won't deliver any projects now that aren't consistent with moving to a net zero future. So that, I think, is quite a bold statement that says, actually, if our client base isn't going to be on the net zero trajectory and refuses to be, they're not going to be the clients that you will have in the future anyway, because they won't exist. So I think that's the other very bold move, is to find the clients that are actually want to be on this journey, where you can really give them the support and advice and insights that they need on their projects, because they'll be the ones that will be coming back for more. But I realise that that's a really tough call at a particular point in time, and what we need is, all projects to be clean and net zero enabled as they go.
Thank you, Martin. Rachel, did you have anything to pitch in there?
I mean, I don't think I have a huge amount to add, but I guess from my perspective, the scrutiny is only growing. And so, as I kind of touched on, there's been a wave of net zero pledges, some of which are more rigorous than others. But the awareness that the kind of consumer awareness and the connected web of organisations who are making these pledges and are all going to need to work together to deliver on these pledges is only growing. So the momentum is there, that actually I would see it as a risk of being left behind. As Martin mentioned, people will stop working with you if you're not keeping up with the pace of change, because there's a transition for us all to make together, and the scrutiny is only growing on those pledges and those changes.
Absolutely. I've got a question here about carbon literacy training and any particular sources of that. Does anyone have anything they want to add there?
I don't know how other organisations are doing it. We have, so you can either develop an in-house carbon literacy course which is aligned to your organisation. You have to get that accredited by the Carbon Literacy Project, which isn't very expensive, but just takes a little bit of time. We've gone a different route, which is to find an existing course that suited us and use that course. So it was actually a course that had been developed to be delivered in the kind of museums and cultural arts sector, and so we're using that course at the moment. But and I probably should have mentioned, Kew is an arm's length body of DEFRA, so we're a part of DEFRA Group, and DEFRA is centrally designing their own carbon literacy course. And so what we'll do is we'll shortly align with that DEFRA carbon literacy course once they've released theirs. But there are various organisations that can deliver carbon literacy or can do that design work for you. And I think they actually have a list on their website of delivery bodies.
Fantastic. I don't think we have any more questions submitted, so I'm gonna ask a quick one finally from me. Just if obviously you've mentioned you're all signatories of Pledge to Net Zero and also all members of Race to Zero, and we've touched on that. But is there sort of any final words you have about making the most out of the resources and the guidance and the training and the support from the network that those two initiatives offer? Who wants to comment on that? Joanne and Ashley?
I think it's definitely focused attention for us. So providing all the data and signing up and then doing all the promotion around it has definitely focused the interest and the attention of our board as well as employees to go, oh, what's this thing that we've signed up to? What does it all mean? What does it mean for our day-to-day work? How does that apply to what we're doing? And so that side of it has been really, really useful.
Brilliant. Martin?
Yeah, I mean, from an IEMA perspective, there are two things that we get. So one is case studies are fantastic, and just hearing the experiences of others who are on a journey and are at different stages, I think is really important, because nobody's got it completely right yet. And so the only way we're going to get there is by learning from each other and being able to support each other. So I think from my perspective, the Pledge to Net Zero guidance, I'm bound to say this, but I think is really comprehensive and guides you through how to make a commitment, but actually how to start to put together your target and the approach that you're going to take. So really encourage people to drop onto the website, and if you're not a signatory yet, don't wait for it to be a New Year's resolution. The resolution should be to do it before the new year.
Absolutely. And Rachel, any final words from you?
Yeah, I completely agree with Martin. And this, as I said, this is a collaborative race, and it really doesn't make sense for us all to. I guess the pace of change is so fast that it's really essential to be paying attention to these kind of central resources, central guidance, central places, sources of information about how to deliver in the best way, because the standards are still changing so quickly that it's having those trusted sources of information is really important.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks to all our speakers for today, and to all of you for attending as well. I'm just going to close on some final words. So in case you missed any of today's webinar, the recording will shortly be made available via the Environmental Policy Forum website, which is enpolicyforum.org.uk. And I've also posted the link in the chat. Also a quick look forward to our next event in this post-COP series, which takes place on Tuesday, the 23rd of November, and that is Achieving Your Climate Ambitions, How Your Professional Body Can Help, featuring representatives from the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, Landscape Institute, and the Institute of Materials, Minerals and Mining. And they'll be talking about how they can support you to reach net zero, demonstrate your experience via professional registration, getting involved in policy work and more. So please do join us for that. Again, registration is via the same link, policyforum.org.uk. And we hope to see you there. But in the meantime, thank you for attending today and goodbye.